Okay, so let's continue talking about how else we can spend the CPs. We talked about spending them on movement as well as on building. Another way we can use the CPs is to flag duchies that we want to control. So, for example, let's assume this Austrian unit in Prague is actually in Moravia. You know what? No, let's assume it's in Prague. And I've activated the Austrians. I've played a card for a couple of CPs, and let's say I played a card with 4 CPs. So he can now move 1, flag 1, because it's a French associated duchy, so he can flag it. So flag 1 for 2, move for 3, and flag this one for 4. There you go. That's how you flag them. And of course, if he had flagged one of these duchies, which are keys, then the Austrian would have gotten victory points from that. Now, another thing is, if you've got an army, so let's say we'll remove those flags, and I'm moving Ferdinand's army. With an army, which is essentially a leader and any number of formations underneath him, under his command, you can actually flag provinces that are adjacent. So I don't actually have to move. He can flag Ratisbon immediately for 1 CP without actually having to move there. There is one caveat, however. You can only do that if the province that you are trying to flag is non-interceptable. What does that mean? That means that there is no opposite opponent's army that can intercept you there. So obviously in Ratisbon there's really no adjacent army at all, so that's not a problem. Munich is also not a problem, so I can flag Munich as well. That will be the 2nd CP. However, if I wanted to move Linz to Munich for a 3rd CP and then flag Württemberg, I wouldn't be able to do so, because Lanz at Zurich can intercept me at Württemberg. So interception is basically if I try to move to Württemberg, he would try to intercept me by making an interception test. Now, of course, here I'm not actually trying to move into Württemberg, I'm just trying to place a flag there, but because there is an opponent's led army that is able to intercept me there, I can't actually do so. So that's essentially how you can spend CPs to flag duchies. Now, why would you flag duchies? Obviously, you would flag duchies because you want the keys and you want the victory points from there and the extra cards for the next turn. I should probably point out that you can't willy-nilly place flags on fortresses. Fortresses has, like this one here in Lisbon, this fortress, for example, has to actually be sieged, and we'll get to that a bit later. But you can't willy-nilly put them on it. Now, why would you flag other sort of duchies? Well, the reason you would flag duchies is that whenever you are moving from a duchy that is uncontrolled to a duchy that is enemy controlled, you suffer attrition. So, for example, Ferdinand here in Linz controls Linz because he's Austrian, so he can easily move to Ratisbon. But if he was trying then to move from Ratisbon to Württemberg without first flagging Ratisbon, he would suffer attrition because he's moving from an uncontrolled space into an enemy-controlled space. Now, while he's in Ratisbon, by the way, I should mention that France does not control it. So as long as you don't have a flag there, obviously if he has a flag there, he controls it. But if he doesn't have a flag there, he at the very least denies control of Ratisbon from the French. But he does not get the control himself. He has to flag it in order to get the control. So the problem of not flagging is that you cannot willy-nilly move from an uncontrolled province to an enemy province without suffering attrition. And attrition can be pretty deadly. Another reason for flagging is, of course, if he had to move to Württemberg, and if Lanz from Zurich intercepted him, and he then had to retreat, he had if he didn't have Ratisbon and he had to retreat, he would again suffer attrition for retreating into enemy space. But if he has a flag there in Ratisbon, he can retreat no problem to Ratisbon. And there's other things, of course, that flags help. They help you to intercept into a space. So, for example, if Lance tried to move into Ratisbon after Ferdinand had flagged it, if Ferdinand tried to intercept him there, it would be easier because Ratisbon is Austrian controlled. And the same thing for avoiding battle, which we will cover later. I'll give an example here. If Lance tries to move to attack Ferdinand and Ferdinand wants to avoid battle and run away to Ratisbon, it'll be easier because he controls it. So that's why flags are quite important, and that's why it's important to spend CPs in order to flag duchies. What other thing can we spend CPs on? We can spend CPs on the diplomatic track here. Now you cannot do it on the first round, so like I said, France will play a card, then Britain, then Austria, and so on and so on. And until Denmark finishes, that was the kind of first round of impulse, it'll go back to France. Until one round of every country playing a card finishes, you will not be able to spend anything on the diplomatic track. However, once you've done that, you can start spending CPs on the diplomatic track, and that's pretty simple. All you are doing is, for example, if Austria wants to get the Turks on its side, they can spend 2 CPs to move the Turks from unaligned proxy into unaligned neutral proxy into a friendly client proxy, then spend another 2 CPs for an aid client proxy, another 4 CPs for a partner, and another 5 CPs for a pact. Similarly, Austria can do something else. They can actually spend CP to diplomatically heighten up the tensions between client proxies and their main powers. So Austria can spend 2 CPs to move, I keep forgetting what country it is. Yes, it's Denmark. So they can spend 2 CPs to move Denmark on the French track back to aid, then 2 CPs back to friend, and then 2 CPs to unaligned. So you can spend the CPs to go back and forth. The only time you can't do it, you can't actually spend CPs, for example, to move Spain on the French track from pact, 4 CPs to move it into partner. You can't actually do it because the only way to actually break pacts, because this will break the pact, is usually via some sort of cards. Some sort of card play that does that. So that is essentially, very shortly, about the diplomatic track. Now, I wanted to talk about, before we go into combat, a little bit at the start of the game. There are a couple of locations that you can't actually go to because there is no war declaration between those locations. So, at the start, as I said, the imperial camp is Spain and French, and the coalition camp is Britain, Austria, and Russia. These two can enter each other's territories willy-nilly and flag their duchies and get their points and attack their armies. However, one thing they can't do is you cannot enter any of the other ones on the diplomatic track that have not yet chosen a side. A side would be chosen as soon as they become a pact ally of one of those. So if the Turks do become a pact ally of Austria, for example, then they would go into the coalition camp, and then the Imperials can invade the Turkish territories, and the Turkish can invade the Imperial territories. So until that happens, France can't, or anyone actually, can't go, even Austria can't go into these locations. They're essentially blocked. You can do it if you declare war. And that's another way to spend CP. You can spend 7 CP to declare war in the middle of the turn. However, usually declaration of wars are better left for the end of the turn because then they can be done for free, most of the time. Another thing that I want to talk about is allies. All sides of each camp are really allies with each other. So all the coalitions here, the British, the Austrian, and the Russian, are all allies with one another, which means that they can go through each other's territories, but they cannot flag the territories. So Austria can't, for example, move through here to Smolensk and flag Smolensk to get a point. No, they can't do it because they are allies. Additionally, they cannot, whenever something is taken by an opponent's camp, so let's assume, for example, that Lance managed to get himself all the way to Bukovina, killed this unit here, and he now flagged it. Let's say the Russian army from Kiev manages to defeat him. Oops. Okay, he manages to defeat Lance. Lance has to retreat. That Russian unit cannot now place any flag there, saying, oh, well, it's not an Austrian flag, it's a French flag, so I replace it with a Russian flag. No. If that was basically occupied by France and they are allied with Austria, all they can do is remove the flag and return the control to Austria. So that is essentially, in a very minimal explanation, about alliances and about the diplomatic track and how CPs can be spanned in that manner.